Okay, yeah. Jon Carl, I work for a company called Office Zero, who's based out of Seattle. I live in Missoula, working remotely, obviously, and I've been remote only about 10 months, so not super long, but I love it. And like Jeff, I don't ever want to go back to an office or a commute or anything like that. It's really fun. Um, let's see, the best thing about being remote, there's a lot, but really the big thing that got me when I switched was um, they actually focus on did you get your work done instead of did you put your 8 to 5 in, because they can't see when you walked in the door or when you walked out. So sometimes I might put in 10 hours and other days I might put in 6. But if I get my work done, they're happy.
I'm Billie Cleek. I'm also a remote worker. I work for DigitalOcean. I've been doing that for almost 2 years. I'd worked at home some before. Like I work for a company and do like one day a week at home. But I've been doing DigitalOcean for about 2 years, and like everybody else, I think it's pretty awesome. I'm sure we'll get into why here in a little bit. And one of my favorite things, I guess, about remote work is just that I'm in my own space. Right? I'm not in the space that someone else is defining for me. I'm at home where I'm most comfortable. I can move around. I can sit down in whatever chair I want. I can stand up if I want. I can go sit on my deck. I can have a beer in the middle of the day if I want, and nobody thinks otherwise about it. It's pretty great overall.
Yeah, Scott Mathson, fellow Auth0 with Jon Carl. And prior to that was with Onyx Maps in Missoula. And yeah, that was a couple years, just a year ago, but did some like remote, maybe one day a week with Onyx, but full time with Auth0 now for about a year. And I think just really echoing everything they said, the kind of the concept of like, work is a place, or work is not a place you go, it's a thing you do. And it's not your, having your ass in a seat 8 to 5. I can take my dog on a walk, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Yeah, just really the flexibility.
So one of the reasons I wanted to have this talk here at Big Sky DevCon is because I love living in Montana. And it's clear we have, a pretty healthy tech scene. But I mean, obviously it doesn't compare to like the Bay Area or New York City. Like it's way smaller, there's significantly fewer opportunities. And so I feel there's huge positives of sort of remote work in that it enables people who live in these regions or want to live in these regions to sort of like disconnect themselves from having to live in a tech hub and like having to live in downtown in some city. So I'm curious what sort of everybody on stage thinks about that. I'm certain this will be a topic that we can talk about with the audience later, because I'm sure there's certainly pros and cons to it. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it was so kind of the reason I went remote was wanting to live in Montana, and it was like there's a decent bit of jobs, but at the same time it's not, like Jeff said, it's not like I go to San Francisco and there's literally millions of jobs that I could apply for and probably qualify for. I specifically went to Missoula and there was like maybe 3 jobs that like fit my skill set. And remote just opened up the door to be able to be where I wanted and live where I wanted, but also do what I do, like what's in my skill set. I don't have to, like, I can flip burgers if I really have to, but I don't have to because I got a remote job. And I'm sure if I waited around, I could find something like in an office in Missoula. But it really is, it's just cool how it enables the freedom to be in Missoula, to be where I want to be. Like I can go, one of the cool things was my boss, everybody in my company is remote. And my boss, every 2 or 3 months, he goes and spends a week with his parents. Like he has that flexibility to just do that, and I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, so I live in Portland, Oregon. My wife and I have been talking about leaving the city because live in the city is great for reasons, but it'd be great to move out of the city for reasons. And being a remote worker, like we have that flexibility. I don't have to worry too much. Like, oh, if I decide to move to Phillipsburg, right? Am I going to be able to find a job in Phillipsburg? The fact is, I could, right? Because I already have one. I enjoy my coworkers. I'm doing something I really like, and I'm working for a good company that pays well, and I don't have to worry too much about the local economy. I just have to make sure that wherever I go is going to have the things that my family values in terms of our daily life. When we moved from Missouri, I lived in Southwest Missouri for pretty much. I was born and raised in Southwest Missouri. When we decided to leave there, it was a real challenge to try to find a job someplace all the way across the country. I will never have that problem again if I keep working remote.
Yeah, so I'm actually kind of taking this role with Auth0 specifically, headquartered out of Seattle. I'm kind of setting my wife and I up for the goal that we have, which is to move to Seattle eventually. Given we could live and work anywhere, I think that was one of the big reasons I took this offer was, well, they do have a headquarters there. Like you said, we're primarily remote, but to have the hub of, we're 5-year game plan, we're gonna head that way, is just kind of, that's my take on it is. And then there's also this aspect of my wife being she's a German citizen from Frankfurt, and the opportunity to travel that way, which we'll probably do next summer for a few months, do the whole digital nomad lifestyle. I've been to Buenos Aires. We just went to the Mexico offsite with the company. It's awesome to travel and work, but I specifically took this role, even though living in Missoula, to kind of set up for that Seattle transition.
Yeah, and I think we've all talked a lot about the pluses of remote work, and I think I actually had a great discussion in Slack with a coworker a couple of weeks ago about the minuses, and one of it is, okay, I can move, I can go anywhere I want, but if I lose my job, what does that mean? The end of the discussion came down to we need to save a lot more money, because if I'm in a place that doesn't have a lot of tech jobs and then I lose my job, how the remote job pool is not as big as some cities. So it is going to be a little bit harder if I want to find another job, probably. That's something you got to consider. And I know a couple people that they're like, I just don't want to take that risk. I know I can always find a job where I am, and I'm always going to live there. There's definitely pluses and minuses, and you've got to weigh them and think them through in your mind.
Yeah, so I'm sure Jeff's going to speak to this. I personally don't worry too much about finding another remote job. There are lots of remote jobs, off the top of my head, Auth0, GitHub, DigitalOcean, NetApp to some extent, that are doing remote workers, and the list is just growing all the time, right? So I feel like this sector of the economy and this opportunity, I don't feel like it's lessening, and I don't see it going down no matter what. I think there's a lot of benefit for businesses. I mean, we've all kind of talked about our personal experience and why it's good as an employee to be a remote worker, but I also think there's a huge benefit for companies to allow workers to work remotely, right? Because when people are happy, they're more productive. When people are choosing to be remote workers, they're probably doing something that they really enjoy. And when you hire people that are doing what they enjoy, they're going to work harder and they're going to work more. They're just going to produce more overall. And then on top of that, the pool of talent that you have available to you increases exponentially, right? And then finally, for local economies, it allows people to stay where they are. If you have family, if you have ties, you don't want to leave your community for whatever reason, those people in your community, if they can take advantage of remote work, they're going to increase the tax base, right? They're going to bring opportunities to the community that just wasn't there before.
Yeah, I feel like the advantages to employers are massive. I mean, I feel like if I were starting a company today, I would instantly always choose remote first, and not because of myself, but because of the ability to hire people wherever they are. So if they are in the Bay Area, you can hire them. If they live in Iowa, you can hire them. You don't have to convince them to uproot their life, to have their spouse quit their job. You can just get people that want to do the work that you want to do, and that's like just invaluable, I think.
So I have a question for you then, Jeff. Like, how would you, like, if you were starting a business, right, and you say, oh, we're going to do remote work. Like, there are things you have to do to support a remote community, and like there are things you give up, right? Like with a remote worker, I don't have a manager making sure that I'm sitting in that chair, that I'm at the keyboard doing what I need to be doing, right? They just kind of, you either have to trust, you have to have like lines of communication. The processes are all pretty easy to do, but you have to think differently, right? Like how much of a challenge do you think that would be if you were starting up a company?
So what I found interesting when I had my first remote job was that it was exactly the same as the job that I'd had before that, except I wasn't sitting in an office. Like I would sit in an office and there would be, I think there were 4 or 5 developers on our team, and this was even before Slack, but we would all talk on IRC with our headphones on because it was annoying and loud in the office. So we just worked and talked on IRC. And now I do that, except it's Slack because it's 2019, and I do it from my house, and that's it. So I certainly think that there are things that companies need to do to enable the right forms of communication and collaboration. But I don't think there's really it's not a big leap. It's kind of the things that you should be doing already in an office. Like you should have systems that track progress of work items. You should have ways to sort of collaborate and share ideas and documents. And those transition really easily to remote because they're basically the same tools. That's sort of my opinion on it.
Yeah.
So what are some things that you don't like about working remotely?
Let's see. I do every once in a while, kind of against your point a little bit, Jeff, but not all the time. Every once in a while I do miss I can just swing my chair around and talk to a coworker. Every once in a while you'll hit that one coworker that just doesn't respond to Slack as fast as you do or something like that. And when you really need them, you're like, come on, I see the little green, you're online, but you're not.
I can see you're
responding.
typing.
Yeah, exactly. So that I feel like I miss out a little bit on that. And obviously companies that have everybody remote, it's a lot easier to have little conversations because everything's already online. You're not going to miss out. That's the biggest one. I mean, I really like being at home by myself, but I do miss every once in a while, I just talk to the cat because I need somebody. So, yeah, that's it for me.
Yeah, I would really echo that. I mean, as introverted as I am personally, I found early on I would weekly go to a coffee shop. Jon Carl joined. I was like, oh, sweet, another in the same company at Missoula with Auth0. So we'll meet up, co-working space, and maybe this is a different, another discussion point is to co-work or not to co-work. I personally say yes, join co-working spaces. So the negative being loneliness and kind of, man, I need to get out and see other human life. I'm driving myself, my wife nuts, and like you said, talking to my dog, just I need to get out of this cabin fever type feeling too. But yeah, so I think to remedy the loneliness is getting out and co-working.
So I don't really feel lonely working at home. Mostly, I have a wife and 2 kids, and they're quite a bit of social interaction for me, to the point sometimes I'm like, okay, you guys should quit talking so I can do some work now. And they don't like when I say that. For me, the thing I really miss though is commuting. So I live in Portland, and for 7 years prior to joining DigitalOcean, I rode my bike to work every day. And so there's a 20-25 minute bike ride twice a day, every day. And I missed that. Now there are days I'm like, oh, I literally have not stepped foot outside in 3 days. I should probably go take care of that. And that's just because I get involved, I get focused on things, and I don't realize that I need to kind of take care of myself that way. I really enjoy hiking and biking and being active outside. And so when you work at home, I think it's really important that you have a space that you can leave. You can shut the computer at the end of the day. You can leave that room and be like, okay, that's where work happens. If that's how you want to work, and also that you just make sure that you are putting attention to those things in your life that fulfill you, that are other than work, because otherwise it's very easy to be like, oh, you know what? Everyone else in my family, they went to the grocery store real quick. I'm going to do this little thing at work, and then like 3 hours later, they're like, yeah, you didn't eat dinner with us. I'm like, yeah, I should. Sorry about that. You know, so like I think you have to take a lot of care to make sure that you are attending to the things that really fulfill you. That work doesn't become all consuming.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say that's also the thing that I like or miss the most about in-person working is sort of the commute. And obviously, like, commuting kind of sucks. But the fact that it really normalizes, like, go do things in the world. And, like, it's very easy to fall out of that habit and to normalize the opposite of that if you don't have this sort of, like, forcing factor of doing that every morning. Do you have something you want to say, or?
Oh.
Sorry, you're holding the mic. I don't know.
Oh, no,
I was going to
no,
move on. I was going to ask
no.
a new question.
I would second that finding that balance for me personally has been, it's like, it can be, like you said, all consuming and just kind of like work. You get up, maybe you put pants on, maybe you're just in BJ's and you just hop right over 2-second commute. Finding that balance, I would definitely second that.
So I'm also an introvert. You mentioned that you're an introvert. Do you think that's a necessary characteristic of remote work or being sort of successful at it? I don't think I do, but I'm curious what everyone's thoughts are.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, we've got a lot within our company of extroverts, and I think it works on both sides of the coin. But I think that it does lend to us better, maybe. I don't know. I haven't thought about that a lot, to be honest. So I don't know. It's kind of play Switzerland on that neutral. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I feel like some days I'm an extrovert and some days I'm an introvert, so it's hard to like qualify this in my mind. I would say I think it matters what you put into it. One thing about remote work that kind of took me off guard at first is like you need to over communicate, especially on Slack. Like it felt weird at first to be like, okay guys, I'm gonna step outside to do something real quick, or I'm gonna deploy this, or I'm gonna like do whatever. And I was like, nobody cares about this, but like you need that visibility. You need people to like, how do they know what you're doing unless you only talk about it in a stand-up? Don't be afraid to ask that question on Slack. And in some ways, like I said, I can't really speak a ton to introverts, but I feel like it, for introverts, I feel like the boundary might even just be like, oh, I have to actually like communicate on Slack. And for extroverts, like all they want to do is communicate on Slack. And that's not bad. Like there's one guy, and I think just by me giving this example, Scott is going to know exactly who I'm talking about, but like in the random channel, he's basically like the top poster. He's posting all the time. And that's not a bad thing. Like there's a ton, our company's about 400 people, and so your mileage might vary based on your company size, but there's plenty of people there to interact with him. I don't really say a ton in random. There's some people that aren't even in random. But for those people that communicate and want to talk and chat with people all the time, there's room for them. And then there's other people that, they don't send a ton of messages at all. So I really think like it all depends on the person. And I don't think it does matter really, like if you're an introvert or extrovert. I'm not a scientist. I'm sure somebody's going to do a study on it. So.
I think what's interesting about Dan, the random trophy holder, is the fact that he's actually on my direct team, and we met, he didn't even come to the Miami offsite, but we did, my direct team, immediate team did an offsite in Miami. Dan lives in Orlando. Anyways, long story short, he's an in-person, this is how he said, I'm an in-person introvert but a digital extrovert, and so that's kind of an interesting concept too. Is like behind that keyboard, he's very communicative, but he actually identifies more of him as an introvert, which is I found interesting when I learned that about Dan.
Yeah, so I think I'd echo a lot of what they said, but there's a part of me that thinks that it kind of sets up a false dichotomy, like the question itself, right? Like I think all of us have there's a part of us that is fed by our relationships and by engaging it with our community, and there's a part of us that's fed by engaging it in our own thoughtful personal lives, our inner lives. And I question whether or not, like, for a long time I always thought I was kind of like in the middle between extrovert and introvert. And as I'm getting older, I think I'm just realizing, like, everyone, I think, is really kind of in the middle. And there are very, very few people that are extreme one way or the other. And the thing about remote work, you touched on, is that it requires a lot of over communication. And so I don't, in order to be effective and like make sure people know what's going on, and that's not just so that they can see what you're doing, but so that if someone else has to pick up where you left off, or if one of your other team members gets a question about, hey, what's the team doing? They have some context for what part you might be playing, kind of how much progress you're making, or something like that. I think that over communication aspect is challenging for people because it doesn't come naturally a lot of times, and it's not about introvert or extrovert so much as it's just about it's a different medium, and we have to realize that people don't see us at work. We don't have those water cooler conversations as much, so you really have to go out of your way and say, hey, I'm doing this thing. And in terms of over communication, like, I know, like, Jeff and I have had conversations like, what's the right amount of communication, right? And text, unfortunately, as a remote worker, a lot of times we're doing things purely by text, right? And so I like to be very, very explicit and make sure that there's no ambiguity. That's really hard in text, and it can be really difficult to read tone correctly, right? So, like, you make a lot of use of emojis and recognize, like, hey, I'm not trying to come across as being a jerk. I'm just putting this out here and, like, hey, like, let's just get to the heart of things. And that can be hard in text because that communication style of text only and not having tone allows it makes it more likely that readers are going to be influenced by what they're dealing with internally as opposed to what you're trying to communicate. And so I think you have to be very careful about those kinds of things. And if the introvert-extrovert dichotomy plays any role, I think it's about recognizing that aspect of communication.
One thing I think about text, maybe this isn't true, but I feel like it's sort of using text as a primary method of communication somewhat de-emotionalizes work, which sort of makes it easier to have more straightforward discussions. I don't know that you'd agree with me, but
I agree with you. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so I thought about making like a title slide for this talk, and I didn't do it because it didn't seem useful. But so I went to Google Images and typed in remote work, and like 90% of the images that come up are like somebody in a chair with the surf washing over their feet, like with a laptop. That's not my experience. In fact, I need like my desk, my keyboard, in my lair, my like whole workstation setup. I'm like not even functional or productive if I move to the couch. Like, I really need to be at my desk. It just happens to be in my home office. I'm curious if anyone else here has experimented much with sort of the digital nomad life, or even co-working, or just like sort of what's your approach to your physical workspace?
Yeah. So when I started, I was, I needed to figure that out. I was like, like you said, like the picture in everybody's mind is like, oh, you're just at the beach, you're like out in the woods. But then it's like, well, where does your Wi-Fi come from? And like,
that's it right there.
I mean, that's a big deciding factor. Like, I would love to just, sit out in the woods. But for me, I think mainly, probably 99% of the time, I need to be sitting down at a desk. Like, I need a little bit more screen real estate than a MacBook monitor. I need my mechanical keyboard because the Mac one sucks. But every once in a while, I like to change it up, and I would agree with Jeff that, like, I'm not super productive if I change it up. If I go to the couch, or something like that. Like I need to like be in my space, and I think what does help. I mean, I don't think we could have really had remote work like we do without laptops. Like we could, and like I could just have a box at my house, but if I can, like, you know, anytime I go into the Seattle office, which is maybe once a year, it helps that I can sit down and there's a desk with a monitor and I can use that. So I don't know that I really have a ton to add to what Jeff said, except just to say I'm similar, but at the same time, working on a remote team and seeing everybody else, you just kind of have to figure out what works for you. Because there's a guy on my team who, he's from London, and this next month he's going to be in San Francisco all week, and he's been in Germany for a couple weeks, and like that's just his thing. So you just kind of have to figure out what works.
Quick question: do you have a dedicated physical workspace?
Yes, it's yes and no. Like it's in the guest room, so if we have guests over, like I have to move a little bit, but like I have my desk. Like when I go in there, like I'm in the zone, and I think this points to Billie's point earlier, where he was like, you need to be able to separate so that you don't just go pulled back into work and you're like, sorry, I missed dinner. It helps me when I walk in there and I'm like, okay, I'm sitting in my work chair, I'm sitting at my work desk, and I'm going to do work.
Yeah, so I would definitely agree with everything you guys just said. Is I have a dedicated space as well, and though I do the co-working as well, I just get like 5 punches a month, so it's virtually weekly plus one. But I find myself when I'm there, I'm productive in the sense of like, well, this is a new environment. My mind's just kind of getting stimulated differently. It's just a new environment. But ergonomically, I pay for it. I've gotten super spoiled with the standing desk. I stand virtually 90% of the time now. And just to have that optimal setup at home, once you have it, it's hard to leave it. But on the same token, like I said, my wife and I explore like a Europe 2-3 month digital nomad lifestyle, and I've done little snippets of that with some traveling I've done with work. And I think that I could do that, and I do look forward to that experience, but having that space, that standing desk, that just like a home base to go back to is really nice, and I think that it's kind of a must when you start with remote.
Yeah, so to answer the first question, I think, I do have a physical space. I have a stand-up desk in an office at the house, and it's pretty much where I always start my day. My stand-up desk has a laptop stand, and I have a Bluetooth keyboard and a trackpad. I don't have an extra monitor. I only work with my laptop monitor that comes on my 13-inch MacBook Pro. That's it. I've been working like that for years at this point. I had a really good friend that started doing that with his, I think he had a 13-inch MacBook Air at the time. I was like, that's crazy, because I had like dual monitor and that's like, and I just got used to all the spaces. Like, oh, this is so much easier because it's so freeing to have the mobility. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to try this. And I don't think I'll ever go back, because most of what I do is all in my head anyway, right? I mean, like I have like 4 virtual desktops, 2 of which are Chrome windows with many tabs open. And I have a Tmux window that I'm running, and then I have my regular desktop, and that's kind of it. And so those are already virtual spaces, so I don't actually need the screen real estate. I'm not doing graphics or anything like that. And so I've gone down to just that laptop, and having that freedom makes it really easy for me to go to other spaces. But I always start my day in the office, and then like I'll go throughout the house sometimes. Like if I'm making tea, I'll be in the kitchen while I'm waiting for the water to boil. Or if I'm in a hangout with some coworkers trying to talk through a problem, oftentimes I'll just be like walking around my kitchen talking to them while I'm doing that. I have noise canceling Bluetooth headphones. My wife works at home a little bit too, and so it's kind of funny. Some days like we'll both be walking around with our headphones on, not talking to each other, but like talking to other people, or she's listening to podcasts and things sometimes. But having that freedom also means that I'm much more likely that, okay, I'm going to go out on the deck, I'm going to be in the living room, I'll sit in some various places in the house. I'm more likely to go to a coffee shop, I'm personally not a fan of the co-working spaces just because I don't need them. DigitalOcean, there's a benefit. You can choose to either be reimbursed for a co-working space, or you can be reimbursed for home internet. So I have symmetric gigabit internet at the house, and that is probably the thing that keeps me at the house the most. And so that kind of gets to the other thing that you mentioned, John, about like, where's the Wi-Fi, right? Like, I can work wherever there's Wi-Fi. On Wednesday this week, I'm going to Texas to hang out with my in-laws for a few days, and the only day I'm taking off is the day I have to fly there, and then a few days later I'm going to Missouri and Arkansas to see all my family. I'm taking like 2 days off. The nice thing about that is like I get to go home and see all my family, but I'm not going to take a bunch of time off. So like I'll be in their presence, and I will get credit for having visited, but I don't have to spend so much energy that I have to deal with too much family drama, and I don't have to take a bunch of PTO just to go visit them. Right? I get to use my PTO the way that I find more fulfilling.
So I've got a couple more things we could talk about, but I think now is probably a good time to ask the audience a question, or have you guys ask us questions if you have anything you'd like to know. Sure.
Yeah, one thing I've not heard any of you talk about at all is doing video conference or video chats. Something we found to be quite valuable when we're working with. Do any of you do video? Because that kind of takes away the issue of not being able to read tone and a few other things. But we do an awful lot of looking at meetings. We use Teams, but just would love to hear your comments.
Yeah, constant video chats.
Repeat the question.
Sorry. So the question was, do we use video chats, and like how important are they? I would say that there are. I mean, depending on the company and the job, I've experienced like maybe 1 to 5 regularly scheduled meetings a week that are all video conferences, and then just impromptu ones whenever needed, like one-on-one.
Yeah, my team does stand up every day is a Zoom call, and then we just have like a Slack command to start a Zoom call. Yeah, so anytime you need to, if you're in a direct message with somebody, you start a Zoom call. I've even done like pair programming over Zoom calls. It's not like the same experience as an office. An office is way better, but it works. It works well.
Yeah, I mean, being with Auth0 as well, we use Zoom. My manager is in Buenos Aires, Argentina, so like our one-on-ones, our syncs, it's all via video. It does work way better than the sentiment or tone via text to see visual cues. And I think it's almost daily actually that I have a video call meeting, at least once daily. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we all make use of video conferencing. The one thing I'd say about that though is like I find that like I kind of need to have some video conferencing. I need more video conferencing with people when I know them, when I don't know them as well, because it helps set up those lines of communication so you can shortcut later in text. But initially, it really helps you kind of get to know each other and understand where they're coming from. My role at DigitalOcean, I end up talking to lots of teams and lots of engineers. They're distributed mostly across the world, but mostly in the U.S., I guess, U.S. and Canada. And I have found when I'm working with a new person for the first time, or on some project, that it's really helpful if we have some FaceTime, because it really does make a difference. And when we communicate later, it just helps us to understand each other. But we make good use of video conferences. I have one-on-one set up with every member of my team, depending on how long they've been there. The longer someone's been there, the less often we have one-on-ones. My team right now, there's lots of new folks, and so I have like weekly one-on-ones with each person, just so we can kind of compensate for that not being in the office issue. And then I also have one-on-ones with people on other teams throughout DigitalOcean, just to kind of keep the lines of communication open. I think that's really important. To have that time. That time isn't even necessarily structured. It's not that we're going to be working on a project. It's just like, hey, let's talk about what we're doing, so we're maintaining relationships across the organization.
Any more questions?
It seems like there's two trends right now. There's kind of like we're co-located with some remote workers, or like truly remote. I guess I'm curious each of your experience
So the question was sort of what are perspectives on the differences between like remote friendly and remote first. I think that's sort of how you sum it up. I don't think there's, in my opinion, and in my experience, there hasn't been a huge one. I've worked in both types of organizations, and they're kind of just the same, except there's like a little rivalry between like remotees and office people, but it's mostly just joking.
Yeah, the one thing I say to that is I have, so DigitalOcean, like, it's very much a remote first culture. My job prior to DigitalOcean was a much smaller company. We had one person on in the company that worked in Portland for like 2 weeks at a time, and he would go to LA for like a week or two at a time. He actually, so we were remote friendly and that we allowed him to do that. But he took it upon himself to make sure that he had a desktop in the office that was always connected. He had a speakerphone, and we could video conference back, and I could literally say, "Hey, Alex," and he would respond, right? And so, like, I don't think that there's just one way to remote. You don't have to be doing Slack, right? It really is, in my mind, very much like remote friendly is fine, but you kind of have to go the extra mile. The company needs to go the extra mile. Like, just put the hardware in place with a good internet connection. That totally works, right? It's just not a problem. I do think that companies need to make sure they are making sure that people are communicating clearly, regularly, and that should be happening whether you have any remote workers or not.
What about there?
Well, how have you guys dealt with, I'm always at home if there's some sort, I'm always at the office if there's some sort of crisis?
So the question is how we deal with always being at the office if there's a crisis. Having worked mostly in like ops and infrastructure, that's already the case. So like if I'm on call, I'm on call. I don't see a huge difference personally.
Yeah, I think this comes down to boundaries. And one of my managers when I first started is it was like Friday night at like 8 p.m. and he pinged me on Slack, and he's like, we had a little video call, and he's like, "Hey, I want you to know that the only reason I pinged you was I saw you were online, and do not feel bad at all, even though like I am above you. Don't feel bad at all to say like, hey, no, I'm just like on my phone or something. I'm not going to talk to you right now." So it's boundaries. You can help yourself a lot. For instance, I know a couple of people that they don't have Slack on their phone. They don't have any work stuff on their phone because their work is 8 to 5. Me personally, when I'm not on call for work, my Slack notifications snooze at 5 p.m. and turn back on at 8 a.m. and I don't look at Slack at all during those times. So it really, it comes down to like knowing and enforcing like your own boundaries, because there definitely is, if you're not careful, you can just burn yourself out because you're like, oh, like I just got to keep working, like it's right there.
Yeah, so one thing I'll say to kind of address that as well is I don't think it's really about whether you're remote or not, and whether critical things are happening, right? If you're at home and you're working, you need to be working, do that. But the company and kind of the culture of the company can really influence what that looks like. We have at DigitalOcean, we have a cloud ops team that is involved in pretty much every incident whenever there's an outage or service degradation or anything like that. And those team members, they will regularly swap out. Like at the end of their shift, they're done, and they hand off to the next shift, and they go on. Right? We can do that on our team as well. Last week I was dealing with an incident, and I was supposed to go to a thing for my daughter at school, and because I was in the middle of the incident, I didn't go. I was like, oh, it wasn't that big of a deal. But my team knew that I was supposed to do that. So then after the incident was over, they're like, oh, are you going to do anything? Like, oh, it happened like an hour ago. And they're like, oh, you totally could have gone. And I absolutely could have gone. Like, it just would not have been an issue. For the exact same reason that when you're in the office and something's going on, there's multiple people working on that, right? And that doesn't change just because you're remote. It's just that everyone's in their own space working on that.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think the remote aspect isn't a huge part of that, as long as you have a sane company and reporting structure and you are able to set your own boundaries.
So I raised my hand when you said, people who deleted Slack. I'm one of those. and the boundaries and balance I found for myself is like, it's hard for me to stop working, and I had to, take some steps to like, okay, I'm gonna delete Slack. My manager knows he's, if there is a crisis, it's just setting out steps to make sure there's not, obviously too, but don't ship things on a Friday. But I'm doing like front
So
end.
that's a whole can of worms.
Yeah. I'm doing front end dev work on the website, so it's not like, there's some things that can break, but it's not maybe as critical as like architecture work like Jon Carl, or it's not. Yeah. Anyways, but the company too, like, is you can set yourself up for that success, but also the company, they respect Auth0 in particular. I've found is maybe if you're interviewing for a remote job, ask and kind of feel it out if they're going to respect that boundary, or do they expect 80-hour work weeks? So, yeah.
I think we've got time for maybe 2 more questions. How about you back there?
So, as a company, are there any teams, roles, or seniority levels that shouldn't be?
No.
So internally at DigitalOcean, we just had this conversation last week because there are some positions that were advertised as being remote friendly, and then people were told, oh yeah, we're not going to hire you because of where you are, or something like that. And so it raised a lot of concern internally about like, hey, is this what's going on with this? And there are definitely people that feel like, oh yeah, like anything should be able to be remote, and there are people that feel like it should be able to be remote. I think a lot of it honestly comes down to your management and their ability to deal with the challenges of remote workers, and because it does change how you work, right? And as a manager, it would change how you manage people. If you are not a manager that can trust people to do things, if you think that someone needs to be sitting in a chair for you to manage them, you're not going to do well with having remote reports. It's just not going to work. I do not believe that there is any position that shouldn't be able to be remote.
Unless you're handling like uranium or classified papers or something.
I think if you're handling uranium, it's more important that you be remote because you shouldn't be near that. Did you see Chernobyl?
I didn't. Okay, one more question. Right there.
So, I think it's easy to talk shop when you are having those open lines of communication. So, how do you get to know your coworkers on a more personal level?
How do you get to know your coworkers on a more personal level to sort of establish that rapport? By having a lot of awkward conversations and like scheduled one-on-ones at first, in my opinion.
Yeah, we at Auth0 actually have a cool like Slack bot called Donut, and if you're in a certain channel, every 2 weeks it hooks you up with 2 other people, and you schedule a Zoom call together, and you chat, and you get to know them, and a lot of I've met people from departments I would never talk to in my job normally. So there's that aspect. The org, I guess, that I'm in, so there's my team, and then the team's directly next to mine. We also have a donut channel that we're in so that I can, meet with them, and, just randomly get to know different people. So I think those are the 2 main ways, and then, kind of echoing what others have said is I don't know the better word than forced one-on-ones, but when I first started, my manager said, okay, John, you need to set up meetings with these 10 people because these 10 teams, because they're going to be teams that you're directly working with. And so I had half-hour, 45-minute Zoom calls with all these different people just to get to know them. And like Billy was saying earlier, once you get to know them and have talked over video, or maybe you're in one office at one point, you get are in person, talking over text, gets a lot easier. And I have grown, I have a couple friends outside of work now that aren't even in my city. I can have a coffee with Scott, but there's plenty of other people at Auth0 now that you know, if I'm in town, like if I'm traveling and I know that's where they live, I'm gonna call them up and we're gonna have a beer or something.
Yeah, I definitely echo that. And I actually ended up on a donut chat with the CEO. He saw my guitar hanging in the background, so I started playing guitar for the CEO. That was kind of fun and unique. And we also were really lucky enough to have this, like, the opportunity that certain, I don't know if your team does this, but they do fly us out for in-person immediate team offsites. And I've really gleaned a lot from those. Yeah, and I don't think I had much beyond what, you know, to add. That's really, yeah, just initial, like you said, initially hopping on a video call, getting that repertoire going. Yeah, and potentially the offsite in person.
So I know we're getting short on time. I'll try to keep this really fast as best I can. So I think it's important to really clearly answer your question. I think it requires organizational support, and I think it requires personal kind of commitment to it. Organizationally, one of the things that DigitalOcean does really well is we have an annual meeting of all employees. Everybody gets together. That's called Shark Week, and that's for a full week, and it's pretty awesome. I would tell you where we're going this year, but I don't know if I'm allowed to reveal it, but it's kind of great. I'm really sorry you're not going to be there. And then we have regular team offsites as well. Those happen annually now. I think they used to be semi-annually. And then so that helps, right? So you get to know your team members, you get to know the larger organization and people you may not run into otherwise. And then when there are new people on the team, I have, like I said, regular, like weekly one-on-ones with them. Partly get to know them better, let them get to know me. Also, just make sure they're getting everything they need to get. As a new member of the team, make sure they have a space to ask questions that's just kind of dedicated for them. And then as we get to know each other better, reduce the frequency of those to every 2 or 3 weeks. In terms of whether or not you make friends, like I consider Jeff a friend. We worked on the same team at DigitalOcean for about a year, and maybe a year and a half, right? And everyone else that was on our team when I started, several of those have left. I don't think it's me, but I don't know. And I consider them friends, you know, like if I go to Seattle, I'm going to call up Mac and I'm going to call up Dan and see what they're doing. And I think that's true for lots of folks. So, you know, you certainly get to build those relationships even though you're remote, but it requires you to kind of commit to building those relationships and be more thoughtful about it.
Okay, that's our time. Thanks for having us. If anybody wants to talk about this, I'm sure I've volunteered all of us. We'd love to talk about it. Thanks.